At 90, Johnny Mathis lives alone in the same Hollywood Hills house that's been hit by fires and landslides. His memory is fading fast. He can barely remember the songs that made him famous. But this isn't just about old age. There's a darker story behind his isolation. Secret addictions, mysterious injections from celebrity doctors, and a painful choice he made in 1956 that haunts him still. The real reason Johnny Mathis's final years are so heartbreaking isn't what you think. When Johnny Mathis was born on September 30, 1935, in a little town called Gilmer, Texas, no one could have guessed he would one day become a music legend. His parents, Clem and Mildred, were just trying to survive. Clem worked as a chauffeur and handyman. Mildred cleaned houses for wealthy white families. But Clem had a past. He had once performed on vaudeville stages in Texas, playing piano and singing. He had dreams, but racism slammed the door shut. That pain never left him. So when little Johnny, just 3 years old, started humming My Blue Heaven, Clem saw a second chance. He began teaching his son songs from his own forgotten past, hoping music could be the key to something bigger. By the time Johnny was 5 in 1940, the family had packed up and left segregated Texas behind. They joined the Great Migration and moved to San Francisco's Fillmore district. The new apartment wasn't much. All 7 kids shared one small room and a basement unit on Post Street. But outside those walls, the streets were alive with jazz and soul. The Fillmore was called the Harlem of the West. It had music pouring out of clubs day and night. Johnny soaked it all in. He chopped wood with his father to heat their tiny place. His parents still worked for rich white families, barely scraping by, but the air was full of rhythm. Then, something magical happened in 1943, when Johnny was just 8. Clem somehow managed to save $25, which would be about $447 today. That money bought a used upright piano, but it didn't fit through the front door. So Clem took it apart, piece by piece, carried it inside, and rebuilt it right in their living room. Johnny sat there wide-eyed the entire night. That piano became his world. He played constantly long after his parents came home tired from work. Their living room turned into a stage, and that old piano became the first step in a journey that would reach the top of the music charts. But Johnny wasn't just a musician. He could fly. At George Washington High School, even though he was only 5'7", he could leap 6'5" and 1/2 inches in the high jump. That record still stands. His biggest rival was none other than Bill Russell, who would become an NBA legend. They were friends. They traveled together. By 1954, newspapers were putting them side by side, ranked the best in the city. Johnny was number 2, but that same year, his jump came just 2 inches short of the 1952 Olympic record, and only 3 inches away from qualifying for the 1956 Olympic team. When the invitation came to try out for the Olympics, it felt like fate. But something else came that week, to a telegram from Columbia Records inviting him to record in New York. He had to choose. Go for Olympic gold or chase the music in his heart. It wasn't an easy choice, especially because the world around him was cruel. As a child in Texas, Johnny had seen the ugly side of racism up close. Whites only signs, being refused entry, being treated like he didn't belong, and things didn't get better just because he became famous. In the 1950s, while on tour, he got word that someone might shoot him if he dared walk on stage in the South. He didn't cancel. Instead, he sang Chances Are while moving constantly on stage so he wouldn't be an easy target. He risked everything just to sing. That's the part of his story people don't always see. The quiet bravery it took just to stand in the spotlight. Back in 1954, before the record deal, Johnny got invited to a Sunday jam session at the Black Hawk Jazz Club in San Francisco. It was a smoky little place where greats like Miles Davis and Dave Brubeck played. Johnny was only 19, but when he started singing, Helen Noga, who owned the club, stopped everything. She knew what she was hearing. She became his manager that day. She wouldn't take no for an answer. And she didn't stop there. She reached out to Columbia Records and convinced a big-name producer, George Avakian, to come see him perform. That happened in September 1955. By the time Johnny finished his second song, Avakian was already writing the telegram that would change Johnny's life. He called him phenomenal. In March 1956, Johnny flew to New York for his first recording session, but he still held on to his dream of being a teacher. At San Francisco State College, he was studying to become an English and PE teacher. He even became student body president. But after the Columbia contract, school had to take a back seat. It hurt to walk away, but the music was calling louder. That same year, the Olympic tryouts came and went. Johnny stayed in New York and recorded instead. He always wondered what might have happened if he'd jumped one last time. But deep down, he knew he made the right call. His voice was different. It had been shaped by 6 long years of training with Connie Cox, a Bay Area vocal coach who took him under her wing when he was just 13. Johnny couldn't afford lessons, so he worked around her house to pay for them. She trained him in classical technique, breath control, range. She gave him the tools that made his voice soar from low, rich notes to almost impossibly high ones without breaking tone. That training turned him into a once-in-a-generation singer. In November 1956, His debut single, Wonderful, Wonderful, hit the charts. It climbed, dipped, and soared again, staying on the Billboard Top 100 for 39 weeks and peaking at number 14. But it was his next single, It's Not For Me To Say, released in February 1957, that cracked the top 5. He even played the piano in the film Lizzie, where the song appeared. Everything was happening at once. Columbia took out full-page ads to brag that Wonderful, Wonderful had turned into a long-term hit 5 months after its release. Then came a record that stunned the industry. In 1958, Johnny's Greatest Hits album hit number 1. It stayed on the Billboard charts for 490 straight weeks, nearly 10 years. No album had ever done that before. Not Elvis, not Sinatra, not anyone. It sold over 3 million copies. It was the first Greatest Hits album to show the world how powerful. The road wasn't smooth. In 1958, while touring major venues like the Copacabana and Las Vegas clubs, Johnny found out who really ran things: organized crime. The mob controlled much of the entertainment scene, and even though he was the star of the night, Johnny couldn't stay at the hotels where he performed. He had to stay across town in the black-only neighborhoods. One club owner told him straight up, "Oh no, you have to stay over in the colored section." His parents just told him to keep going. So what? They said, "You're here for the music." But the racism got worse. In the South, the death threats kept coming. One night, someone warned that if he stepped on stage, they'd kill him. So he did what he had to do. He went out there and sang anyway, never standing still. It was terrifying. Sometimes he couldn't even get a hotel. He slept in his car. That kind of fear leaves a mark. But Johnny didn't let it change him. He let the music speak instead. In 1959, Johnny released Heavenly. The album was lush, full of orchestral beauty, and it sold 500,000 copies fast. It hit number 1 for 5 weeks. It stayed on the charts for 295 weeks. It became the 5th best-selling album of 1959 and 7th for the entire decade. In the UK, it was called Ride on a Rainbow and climbed to number 10. It went platinum in 1986, selling over 1 million copies. One cold December in 1958, something strange happened. While rock and roll was exploding across America, a soft-spoken singer named Johnny Mathis quietly released a Christmas album. No one expected it to do much, but by the end of that winter, the album had climbed to number 3 on the Billboard 200. It stayed there year after year. By 1999, it had sold 5 million copies. People weren't just listening to it. They were playing it every Christmas like it was part of the tradition. Songs like Winter Wonderland, arranged by Percy Faith, didn't just sound pretty. They felt like snow falling inside your living room. That album was so powerful that in 1963, they released a sequel, Sounds of Christmas. It hit number 2 on the New Christmas Albums chart and returned every year for 5 years straight. While the Beatles were tearing apart the music world, Johnny Mathis was quietly building an empire of sleigh bells and string sections. Then came a January night in 1964, just 2 months before the Beatles shook America on Ed Sullivan. Johnny Mathis stepped onto the stage of the Hollywood Palace. It was episode 3, hosted by Hugh O'Brien, with guests like Ginger Rogers and Marty Allen. Mathis sang in front of millions. This was no random appearance. It was a last stand for the crooners. And it worked. ABC's variety show became a competitor to CBS's Ed Sullivan Show. And Mathis was invited back again and again. It proved his voice could still hold power on national TV, even as rock bands took over. By 1967, Mathis was under pressure to change or disappear. Columbia Records wanted him to modernize. So he did something risky. He returned from Mercury Records and released Up and Away on October 23rd. It was different. It had pop, it had folk rock. He covered songs from Dr. Dolittle and sang Tim Hardin's Misty Roses. Critics were surprised. Billboard praised it. The album spent 20 weeks on the charts and even reached number 19 on the R&B chart. It proved Mathis could evolve without losing his soul. But then came something he never planned. In 1982, during what he believed was a private conversation, Mathis told a Us Weekly reporter, "Homosexuality is a way of life that I've grown accustomed to." He thought it was off the record. It wasn't. The moment the words hit the magazine, his world changed. Death threats flooded in, especially from conservative states. Concerts became dangerous. He had to stop announcing his shows publicly. In a 2006 interview, he said, "I'd had enough exposure and was concerned about what came with it." That single sentence in 1982 nearly ended everything. Back in 1969, he made a bold musical move. On July 30th, he released Love Theme from Romeo and Juliet. It blended pop with classical film scores. The title track sold over 1 million copies, stayed on Billboard's easy listening chart for 13 weeks, and even landed on the Hot 100. The album stayed on the LP chart for 24 weeks and hit number 52. He was blending genres before most artists even dared. It inspired others in the 1970s to follow the same path. Then, in 1978, something extraordinary happened. Mathis teamed up with Deniece Williams for a song called Too Much. Too little, too late. Asterisk, it became his first #1 hit since 1957. That was a 21-year gap. The song topped the Hot 100, the Adult Contemporary chart, the R&B chart, and even Record World's Singles chart. His last top 10 hit had been in 1963. Now, 15 years later, he was back. It went gold in the US and silver in the UK. That duet didn't just revive his career, it launched a whole new phase of duets with Jane Oliver, Natalie Cole, Dionne Warwick, and Gladys Knight. In May 1973, he took another creative risk. Over just 3 days at Sigma Sound Studios, he recorded I'm Coming Home with Tom Bell. It wasn't just music, it was a message. The title track talked about rejecting fake lives and choosing real ones. Bass and drums mimicked trains. Strings floated like landscapes. The album only reached number 115 on the charts, but its influence was huge. Tom Bell won the very first Producer of the Year Grammy at the 17th Annual Grammy Awards. Even the Spinners covered the title song and reached number 18 on the charts. 1978 wasn't just about duets. That year, he released You Light Up My Life, and it was explosive. The album went gold on May 2nd. Then it went platinum just 65 days later on July 6th. His version of the title track actually outsold Debbie Boone's in some places. The album hit number 9 on Billboard and stayed there for 24 weeks. It was his highest charting album since the early 60s, and the reason, alongside the title song, were Bee Gees covers like How Deep Is Your Love and Asterisk Emotion, plus the chart-topping duet with Deniece Williams. It was the comeback nobody expected. But behind all the success, something dark was growing. Throughout the 70s, Mathis was drinking heavily. It wasn't just nerves, it was fear. He confessed that before every performance he drank mostly champagne to calm himself. This started back in the early 60s when a doctor gave him vitamin shots that were really amphetamines. He was doing 5 shows a night at places like the Copacabana, all while relying on drugs and alcohol. By the 1980s, it nearly destroyed him. Then something unexpected happened. At a White House event, First Lady Nancy Reagan noticed his drinking. She intervened. She arranged for him to get treatment at a Jesuitron rehab center in Maryland. Mathis later said her action was the greatest thing that ever happened to him. On April 9, 1979, he stepped onto the stage of the Academy Awards with Jane Oliver. They sang Asterisk, The Last Time I Felt Like This, a love theme from the film Same Time Next Year. The song had been released earlier that year and earned both Golden Globe and Oscar nominations. Though it lost to Donna Summer's Last Dance, the performance was unforgettable. Their chemistry was undeniable. It brought Mathis back into the spotlight and led to a Grammy nomination. The song was later included in his album The Best Days of My Life, tying film, music, and raw emotion into one. Music and raw emotion into one. In 1982, he surprised fans again. He teamed up with Dionne Warwick for an album called Friends in Love. It was released in April and leaned heavily into R&B. Some fans were confused, but the risk paid off. The title track hit number 38 on the Hot 100 and stayed there for 13 weeks. It reached number 33 on the Soul Albums chart and brought new energy to his sound. It was recorded in California and even had string arrangements at Capitol Studios. Mathis was once again showing that he didn't belong to just one genre. But not every experiment worked. In 1984, he released A Special Part of Me, a synth-filled album with electronics. Critics didn't like it. It peaked at number 157 on Billboard and stayed on the charts for 19 weeks. Still, it sold more than 500,000 copies. One of the bright spots was his duet with Deniece Williams on Asterisk Love, Won't Let Me Wait, which reached number 32 on the R&B chart and number 14 on Adult Contemporary. The album was mixed at Sunset Sound Studios and mastered at the Mastering Lab. While the US didn't embrace it fully, the UK was more receptive. It hit number 45 there. Then came the headline that almost ended everything. That same 1982 US Magazine article with his quote about homosexuality wasn't just controversial. It was career. Death threats came in by the dozens. Radio stations dropped his songs. Venues canceled his shows. In a later interview, Mathis said, "It bothered me that it bothered people." Coming from San Francisco, it wasn't strange to him, but to the rest of America, it was too much too soon. And yet, he didn't vanish. He kept going quietly, bravely, and with a voice that never broke. In 1998, at age 63, he proved once again that he still mattered. He released Because You Loved Me, a tribute album to songwriter Diane Warren. It featured 10 of her biggest hits, including the Celine Dion anthem from the film Up Close and Personal, produced by Humberto Gatica and recorded at some of LA's top studios. The album got 4 stars from critics and reminded everyone that Johnny Mathis still had the power to make art stop with a single note. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was proof. Decades after his debut, Johnny Mathis was still singing, still standing, and still impossible to forget. In 2003, Johnny Mathis received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award after spending 47 years with Columbia Records. That relationship began in 1956, and by the time he got the award, he had already released more than 73 studio albums. He became one of the most celebrated voices in music history. The Recording Academy gave him this honor through a vote of its national trustees, recognizing his lifetime of creative excellence. He had already been inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame 3 times, once in 1998 for Asterisk, Chances Are, again in 2002 for Asterisk Misty, and in 2008 for It's Not For Me To Say. Back in 1958, his greatest hits album spent 490 straight weeks on Billboard's Top Albums chart. That's nearly 10 years without falling off. At 81, he did something nobody expected. In 2017, he released his 79th studio album called Asterisk. Johnny Mathis sings the great new American songbook. Asterisk, it reached number 4 on the jazz charts. Produced by Babyface and Clive Davis, it included songs by Adele, Bruno Mars, Pharrell, and Leonard Cohen. People were amazed he still had that voice. It was his first pop covers album since 1996 and even included a duet with Kenny G on Whitney Houston's Run to You. The idea came from a pre-Grammy event in 2015 where his performance stunned the crowd, even into his 80s. Mathis refused to slow down. He kept touring hard, doing more than 50 shows every year through 2024. In 2015, while he was on stage in Cleveland, his house in the Hollywood Hills caught fire. He found out afterward.